Jenna, you know how much I love my reality TV.
Yeah.
Housewives, Love Island USA, The Valley. Oh, so many hours I've devoted to Bravo and Peacock.
I feel like they definitely would appreciate that, or at least Andy Cohen would.
Yeah, and honestly, I used to be so embarrassed to admit it. But when I look at it now, I say these shows really reflect so much of like the society we live in, and it's about our relationships, our values, and even sometimes our politics.
So, in a way, you could say that Bravo is kind of a sociology experiment.
Yeah, kind of. It's like it kind of ties right into what we're talking about today about how culture critics and journalists can take moments from pop culture and show us what they really mean.
Oh, well, that's true because I've always wondered when it comes to reality TV, which one is the chicken and which one's the egg? Like, what is the dog and what's the tail and who's wagging what? But let's figure it out and start the show. Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Dom. You know what's funny? Not long ago, we were both breaking news. Now we're
Breaking unemployment records.
exactly just like thousands of other journalists who've been laid off from newsrooms across the country.
Yeah, and after the shock wore off, we kept asking ourselves, what the hell do we do now?
And over many, many cups of coffee,
And maybe a few drinks.
we realized we had a unique opportunity here. Why not pull back the curtain on what's really happening in American media?
Right? I mean, we've spent years in this industry seeing how stories get made or don't, and now we can actually talk about it.
And trust me, there's a lot to talk about. From local news disappearing to social media reshaping journalism, we'll break it all down.
And look, we're not here to lecture anybody. We just want to help make sense of the information that we're getting and maybe have some much needed fun along the way.
So whether you're glued to the news, just trying to figure out what's real in your feed, or curious about the future of media, come hang with us.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking, a podcast where two journalists
Are taking a critical look at American media. So I saw this TikTok video, and it's by
Mhm.
Josh Laura, who goes by the name Tell the Bees. He's a sociologist and content creator who takes like a sociological approach to pop culture analysis. Um,
Oh.
yeah, yeah, and I love his videos. They're always like he just runs the gambit of all these different shows and different music, reality TV, films. It's so interesting. And in a recent video he did, he was looking at Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, which just premiered a few weeks ago. It's
I'm
one of
gonna take
honest.
your word for it. That's one of the franchise. Like I dip in and out, but that's one of the franchises I know
Oh,
it exists,
oh,
but
it's my
that's it.
favorite. It's my favorite. But
So, what
instead
did
of
we learn from the Housewives of Salt
well,
Lake?
so instead of recapping the show, he kind of treats it like a case study, and he focused on one of the women who are part of the show, and it's Brittany Bateman. So
Hmm.
she's now a friend of. She's not a full-time housewife. She's a part-time. She's a friend of. And he kind of jokingly was saying he called her our national id. He was basically saying that Brittany embodies the worst impulses and desires, which is
That
why
is a high
I
bar to
know.
meet. Is it?
Some people really don't like her, which
Okay.
is why she divides people so much.
Okay.
But he does say he has some. Ultimately, he really does have sympathy for her because he sees her more as like a victim. Um,
Really?
yes, yes, and that's what I love about his work, though. He kind of uses reality TV um, to ask like bigger questions about religion, about gender, and about what we think are is acceptable in relationships. And yeah,
Wow, that's really interesting because again, like you don't I always wondered, like I said in the cold about these reality shows about is it reflecting us or are we starting to reflect it? Like that's always been my biggest question of it. But where we are at this particular moment, honestly, I can't really tell anymore.
it's interesting. So with Brittany, she really is someone who's looking for love on the show. She dates this guy, and it kind of goes back at Jared Osmond, who's an Osmond. He's one of the Osmonds. He's
Oh,
the
one
son of
of
one of the
those
Osmonds.
Osmond. Well, this is Salt
Yes,
Lake, so okay, royalty dates royalty.
exactly. And so basically, she really is very open about her desire to have a husband or find love. So Josh kind of points out how, she's kind of getting slammed by a lot of people online, which is kind of interesting because he also says, you have somebody like Carrie Bradshaw from Sex and the City, a character from Sex and the City, who's basically
Who in
celebrating. Yeah.
hindsight, good
Oh yeah.
Lord.
I know you watched that.
Yes, I know. I watched that, and that I will say, even though that's a scripted show, well,
Yes.
reality we both know is scripted too, but
Yeah.
it's
Well,
still though, at the time when it came out, how that cultural shift has taken place, where a lot of young women like myself, I think, my senior year in college when that show first, or maybe a junior, but I was in college when that show first started and watched it all the way through and really was like, as a young woman, especially a young professional woman coming into the journalism industry in New York City, taking so many cues about like what is life going to be
mhm.
like and what should I expect and what are the behavior patterns that are good and bad or whatever. And now as an adult looking back, I'm like, these women are terrible, especially Carrie. Carrie's the worst. Oh my God.
I love it. But
She is the
this is what
low
it,
self-esteem queen.
but you see, this is what I mean. Like these shows, whether it's, scripted series, reality series, it all gets us talking. And sometimes I think everybody automatically assumes it's just fluff, right? It's
Yeah.
escapism.
Yes.
But really, there are people out there who, you know, dive into these stories deeper. You know what I mean? The critics, the culture critics who basically make us dive deeper into what it is that this really means. It tells a story of where we're at that moment in time, which I think is, people like Josh and other people, other culture journalists, like they spark this conversation, about adding history, context, and all that kind of stuff to the conversation.
Yeah, and that brings me back to my question of like helping us understand, um is the tail wagging the dog or the dog
Hmm.
wagging the tail, and where do we fit in that scenario?
Exactly. Exactly. So, I mean, I think now, now we discussed this, I guess we really want to kind of go a little deeper with our next guest, right?
Oh, all right. I have to be totally transparent here. I had a nasty sneezing fit, so we had to pause for a second. But anyway, Dom, coming back to our conversation. So, yeah, we decided to go a lot deeper on that because that is a question, and that's part of something that culture journalists can help us answer. And so we reached out to Kovie Biakolo, who is a writer, journalist, of course, editor, multiculturalism scholar at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. Yeah, those are big credentials. And we wanted to get her take on why culture desks are essential to newsrooms and to journalism, and what we lose when they get cut. Because, of course, you know, arts and culture, if we got to cut
Hmm.
something, that's got to go. And how covering pop culture is really about covering who we are. And maybe she'll tell us who is the dog and who's the tail.
On the surface, culture desk may seem like the soft side of journalism, covering the arts, scripted and reality series, music, movies, and pop culture trends, but they're really doing more than just reporting on what's popular. The best cultural journalism goes deeper. It helps us understand what people value, what conversations we're having together, and how we see ourselves.
I mean, just think about it. Dismissing reality TV as meaningless spectacle meant a lot of people in elite circles missed the deeper cultural currents that paved the way for someone like Donald Trump to rise to the presidency. And if you look closely at the wildly popular Love Island USA, you'll find a sharp commentary on race, gender, desirability politics, and fame. All of those are forces that shape not just who we cheer for on screen, but also how we see each other in the real world.
And that's exactly what we wanted to explore with our guest today, Kovie Biakolo. She's a writer, journalist, editor, and multiculturalism scholar who teaches at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. Her work examines where culture and identity intersect and how pop culture shapes politics, class, race, and the bigger picture. Kovie, we're so excited to have you with us. Thank you.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Uh, Wonderful to have you. We want to start. Let's start off with why do you think culture desks matter in newsrooms?
That's such a big question. Culture desks matters for the same reason that other kinds of reporting matters. They are telling the story about what is going on in the society that we live in. The
Hmm.
culture desk's responsibility is to do so in different ways. You know, on the one hand, you can tell what a society is valuing in its entertainment, in its pop culture. And entertainment and pop culture are reflections of the society to the extent that the society values particular modes. So, whether we're covering books, what kind of books are we reading? Why are we reading less books? Are we actually reading less books? What kind of popular culture, what kind of music is most interesting to people? What is going on in that industry that is making that certain kinds of music more interesting? Or maybe the question, for example, people might be asking is, why is it so hard for new music to break through these days? Is it just the technological platforms, the social media platforms like TikTok that is taking over, or is something else going on in the music industry? Has music, particularly in the United States, has it reached? Are people doing more interesting things elsewhere, and therefore people are just paying attention to other kinds of music? Has music crossed boundaries enough where maybe the US doesn't once have the, global advantage when it comes to the cultural export it once did? So I would say the cultural desk responsibility is to answer all these questions to the best of its ability. Cultural reporters, they see what is going on in pop culture and they tell us, okay, this is a reflection of what we're enjoying, what we're not enjoying, what we're having a lot of debates over, because that's the interesting thing about being on the culture desk. It's a mode of journalism in which a lot of the nation tends to be attentive to, in a way that it is, more open and more accessible and more available to people to comment on. And yet at the same time, if you have historical context, if you have knowledge of inside dynamics going on in the industry, then it adds an extra dynamic, an extra element of your understanding of how pop culture is being made, why trends are moving the way they are, and what those things are saying about where we are currently in society.
Okay. All right. Because as you were talking, I was thinking very specifically about, I believe, the recording artist Lizzo making the or giving the commentary that there wasn't really a song of the summer for 2025, or the fact that when Bad Bunny had a residency, he very intentionally held that in Puerto Rico. But I've read that, I've heard you say before that America is a culturally centered nation where people come to understand everything from sports and war and, more importantly, politics through culture. Can you expand on why are we like this?
I think the main thing is both nationally and internationally, pop culture offers a landscape for Americans to sort of dissect and understand their identities. And partially, I think partially it is true because that is, or at least for a long time it was, the US's greatest export is its ability to take its culture and transmit it all over the world. And that is how a lot of people came to understand the US and came to understand American culture. And I would say that is how Americans came to understand themselves. It's also why, for better or for worse, Americans, at least previous generations, maybe less so with the upcoming ones, but it's also why Americans were always accused of being very culturally self-centered and introspective, not really being attentive to what is going on outside of its borders in the way that most of the rest of the world is and almost has to be. There's always been a much more globalized understanding of culture if you grew up outside of the US as opposed to if you grew up inside the US. But I think from as far as American identity is concerned, we see so much of everything that shapes American identity, from race to class to the mythology of the American dream. We see it all play out in pop culture. We see it all play out in culture. And even, even film and Hollywood, and whether we're talking about music, One of the, I'm a Black immigrant, and the joke I always make is like every good Black immigrant, I've learned my rights by listening to, Jay-Z and NWA. It's like that is just, a, it's a joke, but it's telling that you get to understand the US really by paying close attention to what the pop culture is saying about the US. That's not necessarily true of every nation on earth. There's some nations where you actually don't necessarily get greater insight into them just by paying attention to their pop culture. And not to say that in the US it's solely pop culture, but it is to say that because of the level of output, because of the reality of America's influence over the globe in the 20th century as technologies and our global technologies were improving, it really did take center stage as a place where culture is transmitted to the rest of the world more than it's transmitted to it.
Mhm.
That's only been happening, I would say, in the last 10 to 15 years. And so that's why I would say that more than any other country, certainly that I know and have studied, the US is a place where its pop culture very much is a reflection to some extent of all the other things that are going on inside the country.
God,
You
Or
there's
know,
so many
sometimes maybe
examples.
it's lack of,
As you're
sometimes the
talking,
absence.
yeah.
Sometimes the absence of something is also something to pay attention to, if that makes sense.
No, as an African American, I can definitely say the absence is definitely something that's part of the narrative.
you know, it's interesting because the number one series of the summer was, as Jenna knows, for me too, Love Island USA, which I know for a lot of people too. And yes, I do like reality shows, and I only started watching last year. But I think what I found, when it was so big this year, it was just like the conversations that it started. Especially, I noticed, yes, in one form, it's a dating reality series, but at another point, it also was generating so much content. TikTok commentaries. I loved going to the comments section, reading people talk about their favorites, their favorite contestants, and also there was a lot in terms of the actual people who are partaking in this. When you looked at um, I guess, what is it that you see as like the kinds of social dynamics that sort of are playing out when we watch a show like Love Island USA?
I'm so glad you asked this question because unfortunately, I actually didn't spend a lot of time in the US this summer, but I was still paying attention to Love Island and I was still watching it from abroad. And I will say this, I'm not anymore a very online person, but because I thought I might write something, and I still might, I just didn't get around to it. I still might write something about Love Island this summer. What was interesting to me, as I say, I'm an OG UK Love Island viewer. I came out of retirement for season 6 of the USA version, and I watched this season again. But what was interesting to me about this season was the audience. I had never seen, and the storytelling is actually created a burner account to observe the conversations online that were taking place because I wanted to understand what was going on. I had never seen an audience so invested in a dating reality show like the season 7 Love Island USA audience. I mean, the phenomenon to me is something I'm still intricately trying to understand. And once I understand it, I'll probably articulate it at a later date. But these are my thoughts. I think that the social dynamics we're seeing is, first of all, there has been a lot going on politically in this country
It's an
since the new
understatement.
administration came in. And so I think what we're seeing is a little bit of maybe overinvestment in escapism like we've never seen before.
Mhm.
I think that's happening. I also think it has become a site, and all dating shows and all reality shows to an extent, it has become a site for what people will call parasocial behavior. And that parasocial behavior, I think, has increased, quite frankly, because of the other limitations maybe people are experiencing, whether economically, the loneliness crisis, socially, etc. And so they're sort of treating the people on these shows as stand-ins for themselves in a way. And then that's when the conversation really blows up because these are sites where we're seeing how race and gender and desirability politics are all engaging together or are all intersecting. I mean, one of the big couples that came out of this season's Love Island, Nicolandria, we've seen more conversations on the politics of interracial relationships, which is always a site for extreme cultural conversations, regardless of where they're coming from. But even the fact that Nicolandria became as big as what it is, I think that that's a phenomenon unto itself. What was it about that particular couple? What was it about this very beautiful, in my opinion, dark-skinned Black girl and this sort of fun-loving, good-looking white guy just getting together in the way they did? They are sort of playing out people's, book novel and romantic fantasies in a way, and people are projecting, and at the same time, the show is also allowing them to project onto them in the way the narrative happened. So again, reality shows in general, but Love Island in particular, it allows people to project a lot of social dynamics and to have these conversations maybe with what seems like a realistic setup, even though we all know, well, we all should know by now that it's quite contrived. There's storytelling, there's producing happening. I mean, reality TV, journalism is in the business of nonfiction. Reality TV is not, even though obviously, the people are real and it's unscripted. But I think that the audience was just something to pay attention to, maybe even more than what was going on in the show, because I'm like, what is going on socially in our culture that is making people so overly attached to these reality TV characters in a way I don't think we've seen, although it was kind of maybe trending that way from last year.
It's interesting also because remember, so we had Huda Mustafa, who's one of the biggest star to come from this show, really,
Yes,
who is of Palestinian descent, and also there was Elon Bibas, who has Israeli roots also, who was part of, they were together. It started this conversation up of what's happening politically in the world. And you saw people getting into that. And also Sierra Ortega, who was canceled. There was somebody else who was canceled too for comments that she made, racist comments that she had made.
I believe Yulisa was her name.
And Yulisa, yes,
yeah.
and Yulisa too. So it's we see them, the people who are part of the show are actually reflecting what's happening in our culture too, what we're all sort of watching in real time.
I think the conversation, and Huda is such an interesting figure from a completely observational point of view, because I think I spent most of this season trying to understand what her end game was when it comes to the show, because she had such a winding road. But more than that, I think the audience talking about her was particularly interesting to me, because on the one hand, it's this 24-year-old single mother who comes on the show, and we have those dynamics, and that's being discussed. And then on the other hand, it's obviously she's of Palestinian Jordanian descent, into my understanding, and that identity in the wake of obviously what is I don't know if it's appropriate to call it a war any longer, but we will say, for the sake of
right now,
what is going on in Gaza, we just saw the conversation around, is it appropriate for a Palestinian American on the show to be in the same kind of social situation? And I believe, is he Israeli Canadian or not? I cannot actually remember.
I know he had Israeli roots, but I'm not sure about the Canadian. Yeah.
But there was a lot of conversation around, right? Whether what are the producers doing? Is this a appropriate interaction? Is this trying to stoke a kind of the uncomfortable conversation for people? And my take was that reality TV is fundamentally produced. And I think what I saw on the one hand is there were a lot of conversations around Huda's Palestinian identity, but there was also a lot of weaponization of that identity in order to perhaps excuse some of the behavior that I think most therapists would say was not the most emotionally appropriate or conducive behavior to having emotional healthy responses. I'm not a therapist, to be clear, but I just wanted to put that out there. But I think we also have to be very careful, because I have not paid that much attention, I won't lie, to like Huda's after the show journey. But I want to be very careful because I think a lot of people also projected their own politics onto Huda. And I think it's very important because she is Palestinian in a moment like this to let her speak for herself,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to the politics of what is going on in Gaza.
Definitely. Although I also want to go back to something you were talking about earlier, and that, of course, is and you guys are gonna have to forgive me. I didn't watch the show,
Oh,
but
where were you? What were you doing?
I don't know
That's
what
going to
I
be me
was
next
doing.
year. I think I'm going back into retirement, so I don't blame you.
No, but listen, I did have my moments with reality TV. Like there, I no longer care, but there was a point when, well, I don't have to go through all of them, but I was involved with the housewives and the Kardashians and stuff like that. So I feel like I understand, especially when it comes to that weird parasocial relationship with a show that presents itself as we just set up a camera in the corner and this is what happens, without everybody fully grasping that this it's not scripted in the way of like a table read, let's say, for like a traditional sitcom show is, but that it is scripted. And one of the things that struck me so much when it came to the conversations around Love Island, etc., was not only who they chose to put in that house together, but of course the couples that came together and the politics around desirability. There were so many conversations that I saw spring up out of that. And I was also seeing some people sort of tie that to uh, the larger political conversations we're readdressing now in America about who gets to be a couple legally, and
Mm,
how do we like, is that worth respecting? Are all couples equal and the same? Because who can have kids together, who can't have kids together, what kind of kids are you gonna have, like all of these conversations I was seeing, and they were all tying back to the show, which I thought was fascinating.
um, I think I want to maybe get some clarity on what you're asking or what you're alluding to, because I may have missed the part of the conversation where it was maybe questioning the legalities of people's relationships.
Wasn't I was seeing people talk, not the legality, sorry. I was seeing people be like, and this is why there are going to be questions about perhaps the future of, gay marriage or interracial marriage in America, as people gave their takes on and not that there was a gay couple that came out of the show, but specifically out of the mixed race couple that came out of the show, and whether or not people thought that these two individuals should be together, and how that
Hmm.
fits into a larger narrative of who is worthy of whose desire, and who
Hmm.
is disposable when it comes to if you're looking at pairing up of relationships as more of a competition or something like that, which the show was, then who deserves to be in what
Kind of relationship.
hierarchy?
And obviously the hierarchy of relationships. So I think it is certainly true that dating shows in general, we see this also with shows like Love is Blind. They bring out conversations about desirability and, everything from race and the politics of desirability to colorism, featureism. So many aspects of ultimately beauty politics that is tied to all these other identity markers. I think one thing that has been interesting in that regard is sort of the, I would say it's an almost endless debate about Orlando's beauty and where it fits
Exactly. Yeah.
into the landscape of beauty as far as the US is concerned, but really not. I think it really became sort of a global conversation. And I even got into debates, what about, you know, why is her beauty so contested? And why is it so contested in the particular way that, let's say, somebody who was her soul sister in the villa, Shelley's was not? And it
Hmm.
very much had to do, in my opinion, with not just the presentation of her blackness, but also the actual features itself and what those features indicate. And of course, now we're getting into the weeds of beauty politics and Black beauty politics in particular, which I want to pull us back a
No,
bit from
definitely.
that
That's a much deeper,
because
longer
it's a much
conversation.
deeper, much longer conversation. But I think the conversation around these sort of contestations around somebody's beauty, I think again, that is telling us about, like you said, to an extent, you were right. Like whose relationships are legitimate and who is allowed to be desired and who is believed to be desired and
Yes.
what that ties to. Because again, these are not just, when we talk about beauty politics and beauty conversations, people get lost. I say people get lost in the source of like dating and da 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 da. And I'm like, it goes far beyond that. This is tied to capital. This is tied to economics. This is tied to, the future possibilities of what you're able to earn. This is tied to your point. It is tied to even criminal justice. I would say that people don't understand that when it comes to color and beauty, those things actually affect, for example, the sentencing you might receive from a judge.
Yeah.
So I think that culture reporters, to kind of go back to the necessity of culture reporters, what they can do is they might not necessarily be tracing how the contest over Alandra's beauty is related to, criminal justice proceedings, but what they're there to do is to dissect the conversation of beauty and its consequences and what she might have had to do to present herself in a particular way, because that was the other conversation I found interesting is why Alandra's presentation of self, why it was so unbelievable for people to understand that she was a woman who understood she was Black, understood she
Hmm.
was Black on TV, and did not want to present herself in any other way that would allow for the audience to misinterpret her. And
Yeah.
this is why when the one time where she kind of shows demonstrably that she's angry, the amount, I mean, till today, I still do not understand where people got that mean girl narrative from.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I was so confused. I was like, I don't know, maybe I've lived in big cities, especially New York, my whole life. So my understanding of what is mean behavior is also
It's a
different
little
from,
skewed.
it's a little skewed from other people. But I'm like, till today, even with her having, being righteously angry about, an experience that she had, I still did not understand how that was interpreted by the audience as mean girl behavior until I put my cultural lens on. And I'm like, if she is not performing either into a stereotype or perfectly poised, and by the way, if she is perfectly poised, people did call her fake because she was perfectly poised. So a culture reporter is going to tell you these based on the stereotypes, based on the stereotypes that reality TV itself has produced of Black women over time, Alandria was probably going to be in a very narrow situation of what she could be, the storyline she could be given on TV. And what's marvelous about it is that it's not, producers are not the only ones in charge of her story anymore. It's the audience who are in charge of her story.
Hmm.
And, to borrow, I think, from Bridgerton, she turned out to be the diamond of the season.
Aw. No, but I will completely agree that I was seeing some commentators point out that the narrowness of what she could be, that is is that art or reality TV imitating life or life imitating reality TV? Because that is an experience that a lot of particularly Black women in America have. Whether or not we push to break out of those boundaries, that's an experience that a lot of people can resonate with. At the same time, though, I do want to go back to another point that I made in the intro, and that is the fact that so many people in elite circles tend to dismiss either culture desks altogether, or consider culture to be, it has to be a museum exhibit or it has to be like some sort of lofty cultural. I'm trying to think of something that would be much more acceptable, like an art opening or something, and that it can't be.
High
Uh,
culture.
High culture, thank you. But
Yeah.
it can't be like, reality TV, something that millions and millions of people are very invested in. And is that disconnect something that allowed for missing? And again, I'm not talking necessarily about the politics, but the understanding that the American public had of someone like Donald Trump the first time around. because I was a reporter at the time, and I distinctly remember speaking to people at rallies on the street, and their perception of who he was or who he is was very much based on The Apprentice. It had nobody cared what the, like big newspaper was saying about. No, I watch this guy every week. I feel like I know him, and this is what I know, was what I was hearing over and over again. And I was hearing that from other reporters in the field as well.
Hmm. I would say that um, I think why we are where we are politically, um, to ascribe that to any one thing, I think is always going to be a bit of an overreach. I will say that there has been a lot missed in people's inattentiveness to what reality culture has done to our social and political interactions. I
Oh,
think that people do not realize that, and maybe cultural reporters realize this more than best or more than anyone else, is we are living in a very, very heightened entertainment social sphere. And what I mean by that is in any interaction that is social and that is public and that can be viewed by other people, even one that's not on television, people are expecting performances in a way that they haven't before. They expect you to be funnier. They expect the conflict to be more heightened. They expect the exchange to be more boisterous. I think that it has been, in my opinion, in my observation, in my opinion, as someone who does this for a living, that has been my observation is how much reality TV, and I would say to some extent, the constant self-facing of our social interactions, and obviously I'm talking about social media, it has heightened our expectations of entertainment in every interaction. And so that means that when you are looking to a politician, I mean, we're watching the mayoral um, election in
yeah,
New
in New
York
York
currently.
City, yeah.
And what has been interesting to me about watching it, for example, is how the entertainment value of Mamdani, for example, he knows what he's up against in a way that I don't think I've seen a politician, at least on from the Democratic Party, really understand the entertainment value that they're up against. Because what we've seen is this entire conglomerate, if you will, from the Republican Party who understand that the people who are watching them want to be entertained because our understanding of social interactions, political interactions, has been fostered by reality TV entertainment. Am I making sense?
No,
Mhm,
you're blowing my
mhm,
mind. That is
mhm.
because I was gonna say as you were talking, I'm like, listen, regardless of his politics, to me, I don't think you can deny that the Mamdani campaign's social media game has been flawless. And when you put it that way, that the paradigm of what the public even wants for it makes so many things make so much more sense right now, especially I think, and I can only speak for myself, Dom, but having, been a journalist and, being raised by educators and things, I sort of exist in something of a very nerdy kind of world. And so my brain tends to lean more towards, but the policy and the this and all of those details that, but again, I would go out in the public or even socialize and people don't care. And I could not, you just blew my mind. That's all.
But this is what I say. This is why I say cultural reporting matters, because the average American person is not going to read the policy proposals of the politicians they are voting for. They might listen to the speech. They might listen to a clip of the speech. They might see the meme. They might go down into Reddit. They might go down into YouTube. They might watch something on TV that is fictionalizing a political moment, a social moment, a cultural moment, and all of a sudden they put all of these things together. And what do you have? You have this person who is basically overwhelmed with cultural images of a particular viewpoint or of a particular person, and then they form their opinion around that. And I think this is why cultural reporting has to matter and continues to matter, is because we're the people saying, look at what people are paying attention to. But wait a minute, look at this thing that's created that several groups are absent from, and it's actually affecting them. And so I always go back to cultural reporters are people who tell the story of what matters or what should matter to the American public at any given moment.
You know, because you're talking about that too, like right currently with legacy media, a lot of them are pulling back. They're letting go of culture reporters, and because many feel like, you know what, let's put them on different beats and let's do something. And then I think because they look and they see TikTok, YouTube are sort of thriving in this space of putting out commentaries, and probably like, we can't compete with that, so we're just going to let that take over. I mean, what's the concern though? I mean, I can tell you what I think the concern is from if this is what we're looking at. Don't mistake me. There are some great TikTok people who are creators who put out great commentaries, but a lot don't. And a lot of them kind of are fine perpetuating misinformation or putting out disinformation.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it that, can you expand a bit more about like what do professional journalists bring to this that is different than somebody who's on TikTok or on YouTube or another content creator? And also, what do you see as kind of, well, actually, let's go with that first. If I have a follow-up.
I think part of the answer is what you also said in your question is, as a journalist, I'm held to a particular standard. And so I cannot put out misinformation or disinformation, even in how I choose my words. You can see there are some times here where I'm pausing. I want to be very careful because I have to separate what my principles are as a person sometimes from what I'm able to report, right? Because what a journalist knows and what they report are not always exactly mirroring each other, right? So,
Yeah.
number one, as a culture journalist, I am always mindful that my opinion as a viewer cannot be what I report as a journalist.
Mm,
I actually have to account for, number one, the nonfiction aspects of whether we're talking about the business side of things or whether we're talking of a particular cultural text, and that could be a book, a TV show, a film, etc. Telling the truth about those things makes a huge difference in how you are able to give out reports to the public on it. Number two, I think it's very important for people to understand if you do something for a long time and you're held to these standards over time, you come with a wealth of knowledge. So when I said that, I'm an OG Love Island, we're just going to stick, I guess this is now the Love Island
yeah.
podcast. Sorry, guys.
That's
But when we can't just talk about season 7 USA. We have to talk about it in the context of Love Island as a franchise, in the context
Mhm.
of reality TV. What can you tell me as a journalist that the people on maybe TikTok who might have good commentary on this particular
Mhm.
thing, they just may not be able to because they don't have that vast research or that vast knowledge about the entire apparatus and why the entire apparatus has landed us in this very moment. And then I'm also always looking for connections, right? Because journalism, as you both know, is a collaborative environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have an
Mhm.
editor, you have producers who say, actually, I need more. Actually, the
Mhm.
story isn't done yet. And that is always going to be the fundamental difference because I know this because I've kept a blog in my past life and whatnot, and I did some decent writing on there. But there is a vast difference between me, doing some decent writing and me having an editor, or me coming and talking about something in commentary, and me talking about it with producer and being like, "Wait, you missed this point. What about this point? Have you thought about this?" It's the standards, it's the wealth of knowledge and context, and it's quite frankly under the ability to separate myself from what I am seeing and to say that because I'm a servant of the public, I owe it to the public to make sure that my reporting is as accurate as possible. And even when it is my opinion, that I understand the disciplines. I understand the discipline of what I'm doing. So much so that my opinion as a cultural reporter, and this is not to disrespect anybody else who does this, because I follow a couple of people who aren't journalists, but who have great social cultural commentary. But
Same.
this is not to disrespect them. But reality is, at least it should be, that what I do inevitably has to be different because of those standards, because of those ethics, and because of the vast wealth of knowledge, the context of the reporting, and the insider and the industry knowledge has given me over time. Does that make sense?
Oh, much.
That's
Yes.
everything.
Yes.
I was like clutching my heart as I was listening to that. That speaks to one of the things that I think Dom and I miss the most and struggle the most now that we're working independently is not having that team around us right now, I'll say. Because
Right now.
yes, right
And
now.
Yes.
also because you have the training, you understand what is needed. And
Oh,
you also are bringing that training with you because again obviously I teach at a school and I edit at contribute I'm a contributing editor, but when I'm writing I'm working with editors in different places at this point, and even though they're still editing me, it's not necessarily the same thing as when I was edited, right, in working in a place, but I still bring that training with me because I already know when I'm reading over my piece, I know they're going to edit this out. I have to kill this darling. I know that. You're bringing that in with you. Or I know this is, no, let me see if I can get away with this one, but I probably need to do more reporting here. This is not quite fleshed out. So even, this is what I'm saying, I actually have a lot of sympathy for people who are trying to do the right thing, who don't have the resources, but and who have never been trained. But if
Hmm.
you have received the training, I
yeah.
don't think I think you guys don't realize just how much that makes a huge difference to how to do your work at all.
I feel like you learned so, it's interesting, like having being collaborative, you learn so much because it is so. I always wonder, sometimes I see like, solo creator, you don't have anybody to push back on you sometimes. It might be, now you might get pushback with the people who are consuming your media, but that's not the same thing as when you're really when you're working there to really have a conversation and hear someone else. It's part of it. It's a dialogue that we all share with one another.
Yeah.
And that can get lost in the comment section because then you become defensive. Who's telling me I'm wrong? And then you have all these things that are going on. But I definitely know for us, I know for me, like it's you love I love the collaborative aspect of working with other people on a project where it's like it isn't just about you as the reporter or the journalist. It's more. It's bigger. It's
Mm,
the whole group of you together trying to put something out. You want to put the best product out, and you're
I was
yeah.
gonna
willing to
say
sometimes put
for me
yourself
it's
as a
always been about the story.
The
yep.
story.
I was never supposed to be the star, and it's
Nope.
strange now. We're totally on a tangent at this point, but
Yes.
it's strange
No,
now.
but let's be on that tangent because I think we're about to say the same thing. It's interesting watching this industry go the way it has
Yes, it is, which
Yes.
is almost
because
demanding the
now it's
journalist
about,
become the star. And I'm like, that's not how I was trained. I'm lost.
Yeah.
and it's, I always want to be nimble. Our
Yes.
field requires that we be nimble, and it requires us to be creative in how we get to put out stories. But fundamentally, I think the issue I am having, and as I began earlier, that I'm not as online as I used to be, and that is very deliberate. And one of the reasons is that I felt, number one, I wanted to be in charge of my own thinking and my own voice again. And I just felt completely as a journalist that we were being overwhelmed and we were overwhelming each other with content. And it got to the point where I'm like, I need to be able to think for the sake of doing the story without having 500 voices. I just need the collaborative voices that are going to help me get the story to where it needs to be. And to be honest, I think that has once again made a difference. So I still pop in and out, but I'm seeing, and this is not to disrespect anybody who has to do what they have to do, but I'm
Mhm.
seeing a lot of um, journalism in which it is about the star telling the story rather than the story being the star of it all.
This has been a very healing conversation. I know,
Yes.
I know that wasn't the intent. I just want to say also that one of my other things that I'm struggling with in this new media ecosystem, whatever this period is right now, is just the notion of journalism, of storytelling as just another form of content. Because
That's why I said content.
yeah, I'm like, I don't think they're the same thing. And expecting it, I mean, okay, I'll be real. I think it diminishes the work that the time and the effort and the collaboration and the edits and all that stuff that goes into a finished piece of journalism, which could take months, sometimes years. That's not content. That's not this. It's not the same thing as like, oh, I just like had a thought and here's what it is.
I think it's important that, we do understand there's different levels of content creation. There are people who
Yes,
are
yes.
collaborative, and I think it's important to give people their flowers, especially people who didn't have honestly, maybe the luck, the privilege, whatever it might be, we had of getting trained in a newsroom because it's a much more difficult ecosystem now than it's been before.
And
So
it
I
wasn't
always
easy
want,
before.
and it wasn't easy before, exactly. And so I always want to point that out. And yet, it's sort of, I think we're also partially responsible and we have to take responsibility for it because I think it's, I don't know how to say this without coming off rude, but I'll take the view that, I had to become American. I wasn't born one. And so for me, telling the truth is more important than being polite. And so I think we got to a place in journalism and in storytelling in general, where in the US, I found that everybody would just say, well, everybody is a writer if you can write. Everybody could be a journalist, and I would often get accused of being an elitist for saying I actually don't think so. And and the reason why I say that is you would never say that because somebody can put a plaster on a wound that everybody's a doctor. It doesn't work like that, right? There are actual experiences, and you do need a level of, again, standards and ethics and all of that to actually work in this field. And I'm a big believer in, we should try and make it as diverse as possible and not gatekeep it. But that gatekeeping does not mean the standards go away. It means that more people are available to learn how the standards operate.
Mm.
I love that. I love that. And it's interesting because even like, Jen and I, this whole season, what we're talking about also is we're looking at AI and the impact it's having on the industry. And part of what even Jenna was talking about in terms of sort of like why wanting for a lot of news organizations wanting a high output of content, not even a question about articles, but just about high output of content. Because the more content that's out there, the more people have a chance to read and also or to watch. And I think that the thought process is you have to feed the audience all this. But for me, sometimes it gets to be overwhelming in terms of all the contents out there. You sort of lose it sort of loses value. Do you see, I mean, how do you see AI being used in terms of, especially with the culture desk, the culture writing, how it, is there a concern that it could even replicate any of the discussions that are going on? Could it be trained enough? Do you see a world where it's like it can sort of bring up some of these questions that we're talking about? Maybe not perfectly, but enough so that it might be able to push out, it can sort of, a newsroom may be able to say instead of having three culture reporters, we have one. And therefore we're using AI to sort of help churn out content. Do you have any concern about that?
I'm concerned about it to the extent of, do you want a technology that is intended for summarizing other people's thoughts that have already been done? Do you want that writing a review? Do you want that writing cultural analysis about a phenomenon? My answer as an audience member would be no, because voice matters and analysis matters. And a person who understands the discipline, what they have to say matters. Do I have concerns about AI in general? I certainly do. I think it's important that we have an open mind to it while understanding that it may diminish our ability to think overall. And that is my greatest concern with AI, which is why When it comes to culture analysis in particular, I am very, very reluctant to, I'm very reluctant to, I want to choose my words very carefully. I'm
Mhm.
very reluctant to say that it is something that will be used in the future because I don't know the future. I'm very reluctant to give it a stamp of approval, partially because I think, to be forthcoming, I ban it from my classroom, my particular classroom. And the reason why is, again, I'm like, the culture reporter's most important ability is their ability to use disciplines, to analyze, to observe, to storytell about stories. If you are outsourcing your ability to think to a technology, not only are you diminishing your ability to think, you're also diminishing the reader's ability to understand the thing you were talking about. So I have concerns about AI. I'm also noticing many pockets of backlash to it. And so I don't want to be the person, who is against the printing press. I really don't. But at the same time, I also want to recognize that given the technological landscape that we're in and the social landscape that we're in, holding on to our ability to think and to think independently is going to be critical, politically, socially, and culturally. And so I certainly would advise other journalists to be cautious. I advise my students to be cautious. And one thing that is heartening, I will say, is, obviously, a lot of students are in their early 20s. They're they are of two minds about AI. On the one hand, they think it can be a good research tool to get started, but they have, it was interesting because we did a survey with them at the school, and one of the reports was back. They are thinking that no, actually, we don't necessarily want to use this in the future because we don't want to give up our ability to understand and know things and use our brains to do so. So that's
That's
heartening.
beautiful. That's very heartening and that's incredibly beautiful. I love hearing that. Um, well, I mean, Kovia, this has been, like I said, a healing conversation for me. It's been so great and insightful. We end all of our conversations by asking our guests, what was the path that brought you to journalism? How did you become a journalist? Because one of the things that I also find so fascinating is that this isn't just a direct path for a lot of people. This story winds and turns, and we'd love to hear yours.
That is a great question. And it's probably ironic because, on the one hand, I came in through academia. I was studying multiculturalism and I started also keeping a blog. And I was writing about all of the things I was kind of learning. And then I got into a glorified blog and started getting paid for my glorified blog opinions. And then some editors and across different publications started reaching out and asked me if I would write about things for them. And so I got very lucky in the sense that I had put myself out there already just by blogging and writing for glorified blogs. And then, editors wanted to work with me and teach me how to do it. Well, they're like, well, you obviously have interesting things to say and you can write decently enough. So let's show you how to do journalism.
I like that. I like that. And again, I love hearing all of these different stories because this isn't a straight path, I think, for anybody when they
No.
answer the call, if you will, to this
Yeah,
public service.
it is public service. And I think that is the one thing I always want us to remember. Whatever desk you are on, nobody becomes a journalist in order to make tons of money or to become,
No.
reality TV star. I mean, we, we
Yes.
just we just would choose another field. And I think it's important to remember that what we do is in service of societies, is in service of the public. And
Hmm.
that is probably the thing that keeps most of us in it, to be quite
Hmm.
honest. Otherwise, we would probably leave and do something else because it's not easy.
No, no, it's not. But
Agreed.
Kovier, thank you so, so very much for taking time out of your, I'm sure, busy schedule with the kids and the grades and all that
I
other
don't have
stuff.
kids.
Oh,
No.
I mean the students. Sorry, I meant the student.
Just in if my family listens to this and they're like, well, hold on a minute.
I meant the student kids. I am now at an age where I look at college students and I'm just like, oh, they're kids.
No, you're right. And I was just thinking, I could just see my aunts listening to it and be like, now, what?
Speaking of narratives and reality, there's some reality you haven't shared with us. So yes, thank you so very much for joining us. This has been really, really great, and we appreciate your insight and your contributions.
Thank you so much.
Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Dominic Camia.
Music provided by Jake Howitt. Research by Laura Rothenbucker.
You can watch and follow us on YouTube.
Or you can listen and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you have any questions or suggestions, we want to hear from you. So leave a comment.
We do check them.
Or reach out to us anytime at laidofandlookingpod@gmail.com.
New episodes every Friday.